Hello, and a very warm welcome to my YouTube this evening. My name's Chris, and we're going to take a look at the magnificent men in their flying machines. Now, as you're aware, this was a film that came out in 1965, and it depicted a race across the Channel in 1910. Now, for this to happen, flight already needed to have taken part, and that was in the USA. Now, following Wilbur and Orvil Wright's first flight at Kitty Hawk in 1903, the brothers were then bidding for a government military contract, and they came out with the Wright Flyer, which was being flown at Fort Myer, Virginia in 1908. Oh, before we carry on with the film, I really would like to ask a huge favour. I've noted from YouTube, they've told me that 95% of the people who watch my films don't subscribe. Now, it would be really helpful and very much appreciated if you could have a ponder and please have a subscribe. It helps support the channel. It doesn't cost anything, but the numbers go towards this magical algorithm to help promote the films and get the channel recognised. Really, really, thank you very, very much. Now, the footage you're seeing here is original footage from 1908/1909, which has been enhanced somewhat and then colourised. It is a far improved version of the actual original black and white footage. And the 1909 Wright military flyer was the first military airplane. In 1908, the US Army Signal Corps sought competitive bids for a two-seat observation aircraft. Winning designs had to meet a number of specified performance standards. Flight trials for the Wright's entry began at Fort Myer, Virginia on September 3rd, 1908. After several days of successful flights, unfortunately tragedy occurred on the 17th of September when Orvil Wright crashed with Lieutenant Thomas E. Selfridge, the Army's observer, as his passenger. Orvil survived with severe injuries, but Selfridge was unfortunately lost his life, becoming the first fatality in a powered aeroplane. On June the 3rd, 1909, the Wrights returned to Fort Myer with a new aeroplane to complete the trials which they'd begun in 1908. They satisfied all the Army requirements, and the Army then purchased the aeroplane for $30,000 and conducted flight training at a Sam Houston in San Antonio. In 1910, it was then given to the Smithsonian Museum. The next section of this film is about the film The Magnificent Men in Their Flying Machines. So it came out in 1965, but the film was set in the year 1910, and it follows a proposed air race from London to Paris with a £10,000 prize, intended to prove that Britain is number one in the air. Now, Ken Anakin, who directed the film, had served in the RAF during the Second World War, and he was very keen to have a Wright Flyer take part in the film, obviously a replica, but they were unable to achieve this, so they instead had a Bristol box kite. In fact, 3 replica Bristol box kites were built by F.G. Miles for this film, and one of which still flies regularly at the Shuttleworth Trust at Old Warden in Bedfordshire. Now, let's take a look at the 1965 version, The Magnificent Men in Their Flying Machines. There were quite a collection of notable actors that took part in this film, namely Terry Thomas, Eric Sykes, Tony Hancock, Gordon Jackson, Sarah Miles, and many, many more. I found it an entertaining and hysterically funny film back in the day, and I hope you enjoy watching along and really having a look back at the fun times of the mid-60s when these sorts of films were made. The Magnificent Men in Their Flying Machines film was written by Ken Anakin and Jack Davis. It was directed by Ken Anakin. The film was set in the year 1910, and the film follows an air race from London to Paris with the £10,000 prize money, which interestingly in today's equivalent is £1.3 million. It was intended to prove that Britain is number one in the air. The film is noted for its spectacular flying scenes featuring dozens of period-accurate life-size working airplanes, and it was shot in 65mm Todd AO by cinematographer Christopher Chalice, and features the film score composed by Ron Goodwin. It was released in the United Kingdom by 20th Century Fox on the 16th of June 1965. The film was both a widespread critical and commercial success. It was nominated for 3 BAFTA awards, winning the Best British Costume Design, Colour, as well as an Academy Award and a nomination for Best Original Screenplay. The film also received 3 Golden Globe Awards nominations, including Best Motion Picture, Musical and Comedy. The film includes reproduction aircraft of the 1910 era, including a triplane, monoplane, spyplanes, and also Horatio Phillips' 20-wing multiplane from 1904. Wheeler insisted on authentic materials but also allowed the use of modern engines and modern modifications necessary to ensure safety. Of 20 types built in 1964 at £5,000 each, 6 could fly, flown by 6 stunt pilots and maintained by 14 mechanics. The race takeoff scene, where 7 aircraft are in the air at once, included a composite addition of 1 aircraft. Flying conditions were monitored carefully, with aerial scenes filmed before 10 o'clock in the morning or early in the evening when the air was less turbulent, as the replicas, true to the originals, were flimsy and control, especially in the lateral plane, tended to be marginal. When weather conditions were poor, interiors or other incidental sequences were shot instead. Wheeler eventually served not only as the technical advisor but also as the aerial supervisor throughout the production, and later wrote a comprehensive background account of the film and the replicas that were constructed to portray the period aircraft. Competitors: Richard Mays, the army officer, who was played by James Fox, was flying the Antoinette Mark IV, and of that aircraft there were 8 flying replicas. Then along comes Sir Percy Ware-Armitage, who was played by Terry Thomas, and he was flying an Avro triplane Mark IV, and of that type aircraft 12 replicas were built for flying. Orvil Newton, who was played by Stuart Whitman, was flying the Bristol box kite, nicknamed the Phoenix Flyer. While each aircraft was an accurate reproduction, some impersonated other types. For instance, the Phoenix Flyer was in actual fact a Bristol box kite built by F.G. Miles Engineering at Ford in Sussex, and it represented the Curtiss biplane of a 1910 vintage. Anakin had apparently expressed a desire to have a Wright Flyer in the film, but the Bristol British derivative of the French 1909 Farman was chosen instead, because it shared a common general layout with the Wright or the Curtiss Pusher biplane of that era and had an excellent reputation for tractability. For the impersonation, the replica had the Phoenix Flyer painted on its outer rudder surfaces and was also called the Gruber Newton Flyer, adding to the name of its primary backer, although the American pilot character Orvil Newton inaccurately describes his aircraft to Patricia Rawnsley, who was played by Sarah Miles, as a Curtiss with an Anzani engine. Slapstick stunts on the ground and in the air were a major element, and often the directors requested repeated stunts. And of course the stuntmen were more than accommodating, it meant more pay. Early Billing tractor biplane replica flown by David Watson appeared in 2 different guises in more or less authentic form, impersonating an early German tractor biplane, and also as the Japanese pilot's mount modified with the box kite-like side curtains over the interplane struts, a covered fuselage and covered oriental decorations. In addition to the flying aircraft, several unsuccessful aircraft of the period were represented by non-flying replicas, including contraptions such as the Ornithopter, flown by the Italian contender Picard Dubras Philippe's. The flying replicas were specifically chosen to be different enough that an ordinary audience member couldn't distinguish them. They were all types reputed to have flown well in or about 1910. In most cases this worked well, but there were a few surprises, adding to an accurate historical reassessment of the aircraft concerned. For example, in its early form, the replica of the Santos Dumont de Mel, also a forerunner of today's ultralight aircraft, was unable to leave the ground except in short hops. Extending the wingspan and fitting a more powerful RDM 50 horsepower engine produced only marginal improvement, When Doug Bianchi and the personal paint production staff who constructed the replica consulted with Alan Wheeler, he recalled that the demo's designer and first pilot, Alberto Santos Dumont, was a very short, slightly built man. A suitably small pilot, Joan Hughes, a wartime member of the Air Transport Auxiliary who was the Airways Flying Club chief instructor, was hired. With reduced payload, the diminutive Demoiselle flew very well, and Hughes proved a consummate stunt flyer, able to undertake exacting manoeuvres. In 1960, Doug Bianchi had created a one-off Vickers 22, a Blériot-type monoplane, using Vickers company drawings intended for the Vickers Flying Club in 1910. 20th Century Fox purchased and completed the replica, although it required a new engine and modifications, including replacing the wooden fuselage structure with welded steel tubing, as well as incorporating ailerons instead of wing warping. The Vickers 22 became the final type used by the Italian contestant. Sometime after the film wrapped, the Vickers was sold to a buyer in New Zealand. I really hope you've enjoyed this nostalgic look back at the magnificent men in their flying machines. It was a really enjoyable film to put together, and a very, very entertaining film, full of comedy and hijinks. A tremendous film, all in all. I wish you all the very best. Look forward to seeing you in the next film. Take the greatest of care. Cheers for now. Bye.